Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. The lights are bright. Thank you to Graham for inviting me here. I was excited to hear about this new initiative on the Isle of Man. It's my first time here. And I've really enjoyed the presentations that I've heard so far, the speakers who have come before me. And I was thinking to myself, what is it that seems to unite the speakers and the subjects that are important to them? And the word that came to my mind was common sense. And I heard more than common sense. I heard about a lot of work being done, a lot of experience, a good deal of wisdom. But I also heard common sense, and I wondered to myself, how is it that we've come so far from common sense in the way that we organise our services, our mental health services? I'm going to talk to you in a moment for a while about open dialogue, a different way, which is a different way, quite a radically different way, I think, of organising psychiatric services or mental health services. But maybe before that, I'd just like to say a little bit something about how I came to be standing here. Graham told me that we were going to do a TED-style talk, so I had to I had to look up what is a TED-style talk, and the first thing was you're not allowed any slides. And so I thought I'd talk without any slides, and then I see that there's quite a lot of slides, but now that I can see that the challenge in changing slides, I think I may be onto a good thing. So I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to talk about. Of course, I'm going to talk about open dialogue, but I'm also going to say something, I think, about how I come to be here, but also this idea of common sense, because I think what I've seen over the 25 or even probably 25 or so years I've been involved in mental health. I started off in the system as a psychologist, but in a sense I couldn't hack it in the end. I couldn't hack so much of the kind of technological, I would say, scientific drive within psychology at the expense of, I would say, human relations and common sense. Of course, the field is dominated by psychiatry, and we have diagnostic manuals that seem to grow every time they're published, with new disorders discovered, and with most probably a drug or two that will offer promise of some kind of cure or maintenance of said disorder. And I think, to my mind, what we have come to create, and this is by no means an anti-psychiatry talk, because I've met many great psychiatrists in my time, and the service in Western Lapland, where the open dialogue approach was developed, is a psychiatric service, and it was developed by psychologists and psychiatrists. If we think of the pyramid we saw before, there is a chief psychiatrist at the top, but it's a very different way of practicing psychiatry. But I think what we've come to see, the word that came to mind as I was thinking about the services that we've come to develop in most of the Western world, is they're fairly monstrous. And I think for me, there is an absurdity to a lot of what is going on in these services. But it's, as I said, it's not an anti-psychiatry talk. My first inspiration when I was studying psychology at university, but I was also reading some things on the side that were given to me by people that weren't actually sort of professors on the degree that I did, was a Glaswegian psychiatrist called R.D. Laing. And maybe there's three ideas from his books that I was reading, sort of in my early 20s, I guess, that we can find in open dialogue. The first idea would be there is meaning in so-called madness. The second idea would be we're more likely to be close to the meaning if we try to understand somebody's lived experience on its own terms. So in other words, we kind of throw out the diagnostic manual. Maybe it's helpful for someone to have medications for some time. Medications are used in Western Lapland, but they're used much more selectively. Only when needed, only if needed, only for as much as needed, and only as long as needed. To the extent that only about 50% of people who are diagnosed with psychosis, they're not so hot on diagnosis because they use the same basic approach with everyone, which is, in a sense, a different approach for everyone because every crisis is unique in their philosophy. But yeah, only about 50% of people diagnosed with psychosis will get any kind of antipsychotics, and within 2 years, only 20% of people are taking antipsychotics. Those are far lower levels than in what we could call treatment as usual. So some medications may be used, but they're not so, as I say, they're more inclined to not think in terms of diagnosis, and what they want to do is go and meet with people in the community as quickly as possible in a crisis situation, which is, I would argue, common sense. So the second idea of Lang is we're more likely to understand the meaning of someone's experience if we take time to get to know that person and we listen. And what is remarkable to me is, it happened again yesterday when I was meeting with a colleague with a family in London, where I'm based, is how often families say in their feedback about open dialogue is, you really listened. And I think to myself, well, what's happening elsewhere? If that is, the experience of being listened to is so striking in open dialogue, but it speaks of something. So that's the second idea, that we try to understand people's experience on its own terms, what I would call a phenomenological approach. The third idea is that we're more likely to understand someone's experience if we can meet them in their own context, in their social context, which most commonly might be with family members, but could also include friends, neighbors, colleagues. There's a very open idea about who we can meet with in a crisis situation. So those are three basic ideas I think were in Lang's early writings, and which we can find at the heart of the open dialogue approach in Western Lapland. Maybe I'll talk a little bit more about Western Lapland now. So I suppose the reason that I got involved in open dialogue, which was about 7 years ago now, was because after, leaving my career as a psychologist, a few years later I went on to work in therapeutic communities and to train as a psychotherapist. I came through that training realizing that there were quite limited opportunities to work as a therapist in the health service, particularly for people experiencing what we might call psychosis, which is the area that I've kind of always specialized in. And I've been involved in many alternative approaches, and those, whilst I value and sort of cherish many aspects of many of those services and would gladly work within them, my interest was into trying to take some of these basic values into the mainstream. So I suppose I was traveling around the world and I was looking for a place where these ideas had been most fully developed in public services, and that place turned out to be Western Lapland. And since then, I suppose I've been putting my energy with others into developing this approach in the UK and elsewhere. In 5 years, I think we have perhaps as many as 15 National Health Service trusts involved in some kind of open dialogue training. So that's a reasonable start. It speaks of the interest in the approach, which I think comes from all angles. It comes from professionals, but it comes from service users, it comes from families, because it makes sense. Back to that word, sense, again. Okay, on to Western Lapland. Western Lapland, it was the early 1980s. They had the worst incidence of schizophrenia in any Western country. The region of Western Lapland has a population of about 65,000 now. It was maybe about 75, 80,000 at that time. And They had a hospital, I think, with about 150 beds that were all full, mostly with people in chronic situations on long-term medications. They had another 100-odd beds in Rovaniemi, which is on the Arctic Circle, which is out of their region, so they couldn't accommodate everyone within their region. And then they have a unique opportunity to institute a change because of various changes in the way they were structuring their hospital system. And I think because it's a relatively small region, I think certain individuals, when they get into positions of some power, can make a difference. And there was sympathetic counsellors who were involved as well. And basically what happened was they were given the opportunity to rethink the foundation of their mental health services. And that's where the story starts in the early 80s. Now we are getting on for probably 35 years, almost 40 years later. We now have strong evidence that we can show about the value of the approach that they've developed. The way they started was there was 2 or 3 psychologists that were interested in family therapy, and so they trained as family therapists. But when they started to practice family therapy within their service, they started to feel uncomfortable with certain aspects of the family therapy approach as it was practiced at that time. And really their story is one of, they talk about, we've been guided by feelings of comfort and discomfort all the way through as they've developed their service. And essentially what that means is they've allowed themselves to be human in their work, to be guided by their feelings, and they've had a certain freedom to develop and adapt. And they also felt the families were uncomfortable with family therapy, or many of them. There's a sense, perhaps, that the family is an object of treatment, where the family therapists are the experts with the interpretations, who can see the dynamics, etc. So they abandoned that idea, and what they decided to do was instead to meet with families to think together about what is needed. And that was really the birth of the open dialogue approach. And this forum with families, initially the idea was let's get together to think about what is needed. And what they ended up finding out was what was actually needed in most circumstances was this very forum to get together. So one of the functions of what they call a network meeting is it's a forum for decision making about what is needed, how to move forward together, and that can of course include other services, other components, other aspects. But most often what happens is that the team will come, and now I'm maybe going to get into the 7 principles of open dialogue. The team will come as soon as possible in a crisis situation. Within 24 hours, they will be at the family home, or they will be in an outpatient clinic if the family prefer to meet there. And they will sit together with any members of the social network that the person at the center of concern or the persons at the center of concern would like to be there. So in that initial phone conversation, the basic idea is anyone can call the psychiatric service, whether you're the person at the center of concern, a family member, professional. Their basic idea, they have a few basic ideas in Western Lapland that I really like. And one is, the idea is you've always called the right place. We're not going to pass you on somewhere else. We're not going to put you on a waiting list. You've always called the right place, and we'll be there within 24 hours. Maybe it's fairly obvious why we'd include the family. Of course, some people might prefer the family not to be involved, and that will be respected. Because everyone's lived through these experiences together, most probably. I think I've yet to meet a family in the 4 or 5 years I've been practicing in this way where there isn't more than one person who is struggling in some way. So while it might seem like there's a person at the center of concern, and there may well be, it's usually the case when you create a forum for dialogue that there's more to the story. And most people want to take that opportunity to share their story if they don't feel judged, if they feel safe enough, if they feel heard. And that's the forum that we offer in the open dialogue approach. So that's the first 2 principles: 24 immediate response, include the social network. Flexibility and mobility is the third one. That means that we will adapt the service to the needs of the person rather than the other way around, and we will go to the home. We will be mobile if that's what the family wish. Fourth principle would be responsibility. If I take a call from a family, if I'm working in the hospital in Western Lapland, because they do have a hospital there, but now the number of beds is down to about 15, I think, 20 or 15 beds, and they're often half empty. If I take a call, somebody calls the psychiatric service, it's my responsibility to make sure that meeting happens within 24 hours. I'm not going to pass it on to someone else to do. I think the notion of responsibility runs through the approach more generally, more deeply, is that our subjectivity is welcome as professionals, and so we must take responsibility for everything we say in the meetings. And we always work as a team, so it's always two people who go, or two or more. And so if I say something in a meeting and my colleague wonders why I've said that, hopefully my colleague will feel enabled to say to me, "Hey Nick, I'm really curious why you said that. What do you mean by that?" So I'm held to account for what I say, and everyone's subjectivity, including the professionals, is important. So this is not a technological, manualized approach. This is an approach based in human relations. 2 minutes. Oh, okay. You can hear more this afternoon. There's a workshop. To whistle through, the fifth principle would be psychological continuity, that it's going to be the same team that work with the family throughout the process. Even if somebody is so-called discharged from the service, if there is another crisis down the line, and the relapse rates in Finland are much lower than in treatment as usual, but it will be the same team that will work with them. There's a guy in London who comes to our seminars and conferences. He likes to tell the story as how he's seen 99 psychiatrists in his career as a mental health patient. This would not happen in Western Lapland. Sixth principle would be tolerance of uncertainty. There is uncertainty in every crisis, but there is also opportunity. As R.D. Laing said, psychosis can be breakthrough as well as breakdown. So we've got from recovery to discovery. So we have to, in order to be in this process together where there's a possibility for something new to emerge, we have to be able to tolerate a lot of anxiety and the uncertainty. The seventh principle is what they call dialogism, which is really that dialogue is at the heart of this work. Dialogue is the process, but dialogue is also the goal. Because if the dialogue in the family and the social network develops through this process, then we can say they're in a strong position to continue the dialogue together. So just to finish, I would say, in terms of the outcomes, there's lots of research online that you can look at. There's now a 20-year outcome study that's come out. In a nutshell, I would say most of the studies have been 2-year or 5-year follow-ups. And in those 2- and 5-year follow-ups, you have 70 to 80% of people working or studying, only 20% of people. This is people experiencing psychosis. 20% of people on disability benefits, only 20%, as I said, still taking neuroleptics. And those statistics sort of turn on their head what you can find in other services in terms of people's capacity to really develop their lives and to go through these experiences in the least damaging way possible. Because I think, coming back to the notion of common sense, it can be said that if somebody is experiencing extreme states or psychosis, that in a way they're not in the field of common sense, they're not in the field of something that's shared with others. And why, when they're in that situation, would we bombard them with another system that does not make sense, where there is not common sense, where there is not this possibility of a relatedness where we can start to understand the meaning in their experience? Why would we just bombard them with medications and other more technological approaches? It makes no sense to me. Thank you.